You probably grew up hearing this. Never borrow money. Debt is the enemy. Your parents said it. Financial gurus said it. And yeah, Dave Ramsey built a whole career on that advice. And for most people, it's solid. But here's the thing nobody tells you. There's a completely different set of rules for the ultra-wealthy. Rules that turn everything you think you know about money upside down. The richest people on the planet live almost entirely on borrowed money. Not because they can't pay it back, but because not paying it back is actually smarter. It saves them massive amounts in taxes, lets their wealth grow faster, and creates a system their families can ride for generations. This method even has a name: buy, borrow, die. It's been quietly used by wealthy families for decades. Legal, simple, and basically unavailable to most people because the system isn't designed to make everyone rich. It's designed to keep you working. Let's break this down. Most people think debt is the problem. It isn't. The problem is how you use it. Take a normal scenario. You need a car. You don't have cash, so you get a loan. Interest adds up. The car loses value the moment you drive it off the lot. And every month you're paying for something worth less than what you owe. Meanwhile, taxes have already taken a chunk of your paycheck. That's double trouble. The government takes part of your money. Then the bank charges interest. And the asset you bought is shrinking in value. That's the trap most people are in. Borrowing to buy things that lose value, while paying with taxed income. It's exhausting and keeps most people stuck on a financial treadmill. Now, let's see how the wealthy play the game differently. Imagine you own millions in assets, stocks, real estate, maybe a business. You need cash to cover living expenses. You could sell some assets, but that triggers taxes, often a huge chunk. Sell a little too much, and you lose the future growth those assets would have created. Instead, the rich borrow against their assets. You show a bank your $10 million balance sheet. They offer you a low-interest loan because your assets are stable and predictable. You get the money you need without selling a single thing. No capital gains taxes. Your assets keep growing while you only pay a tiny fraction in interest. You just boosted your wealth without touching the foundation. Here's the magic. The wealthy don't borrow everything they can. They borrow a fraction. That keeps the loan safe for the bank and protects them if the market dips. The bank is betting on your assets, not your job. That's why terms are low interest, flexible, and long-term. Over time, they just roll the loan forward. Pay interest, refinance, borrow more. The principal rarely gets touched. The system lets them live on borrowed money while their real wealth keeps compounding. Die. Something amazing happens. In the US, assets get a step up in basis. Essentially, any gains they accumulated disappear for tax purposes. Their heirs inherit everything with a fresh cost basis. Sell, and the profits are tax-free. Borrow again, live off the interest, and repeat the cycle. That's generational wealth in action. Why isn't everyone doing this? 2 reasons. First, you need a lot of assets to even qualify. You can't do this with just a house and a car. Banks won't lend that way. Second, psychologically, most people can't live on debt. We're conditioned to fear it, to pay it off as soon as possible. The wealthy see it differently. They treat loans as a tool, not a burden. Some of the richest people in the world follow this strategy openly. They borrow against stock holdings or businesses instead of selling them. The assets grow, the taxes stay low, and the cycle continues. I'm not saying this is for everyone. If you're not sitting on millions in appreciating assets, trying this would be financial suicide. But understanding the concept changes how you think about money. The game isn't about chasing higher income. It's about owning assets that grow faster than your expenses, using debt strategically, and letting the system work for you. Oh, and by the way, I run a free community where I show exactly how to grow a YouTube channel from scratch and create income streams even in uncertain times. If you're curious, there's a link below. I'll walk you step by step, and you can start from zero. Remember, this is educational. I'm not a financial advisor. Your results depend entirely on your decisions. But if you understand this strategy, you'll never look at money the same way again. Now, let's dig even deeper because most people still don't see the full picture. The buy, borrow, die strategy isn't just about borrowing money. It's about leveraging time, taxes, and psychology. Every decision the wealthy make is calculated to maximize growth while minimizing costs. Think about your own life for a moment. You work hard, maybe save a little, and try to avoid debt. If you ever need money, you might sell stocks. cash in retirement accounts, or even take out a personal loan. And each time, the government and banks take their cut. You work for your money, and then you give part of it away, sometimes before you even see it. The wealthy don't play that game. They put their money to work in a way that earns money while they sleep. Stocks, real estate, businesses, these aren't just things they own. They are machines generating wealth. And when they need cash, they borrow against those machines instead of dismantling them. That's the key. Let's go through a simple example most people can relate to. Imagine you have a rental property worth $1 million. You could sell it, pay capital gains taxes, and take home maybe $800,000. Or you could take out a loan against it, paying only small percentage in interest while keeping the property generating rental income. Over 10 years, you could take multiple loans, keep all the rent, and grow your equity. By the end, you could have more cash in hand and more assets than if you had sold. Here's another angle: risk management. Most people think borrowing is dangerous. And yes, if you borrow without a plan, it is. But the wealthy are disciplined. They borrow small relative to what they own. That's called a low loan-to-value ratio. If the market dips, their assets still cover the loans, and they don't panic. That's why you rarely hear about individual defaults for these kinds of loans. It's math, not luck. Now, let's address one of the most controversial parts: living on borrowed money. Most people cringe at the thought. I could never owe that much. But here's the mindset shift. Debt isn't the enemy. Not all debt is equal. There's bad debt, credit cards, payday loans, auto loans for depreciating cars. Then there's strategic debt, the kind that grows your wealth faster than the cost of borrowing. That's what the wealthy use. And it's not just theory. There are countless real-world examples. Elon Musk, for instance, borrowed billions against his Tesla shares instead of selling them. That allowed him to fund new projects, buy property, and even pay for personal expenses without triggering massive taxes. Larry Ellison at Oracle did something similar with his shares. They didn't sell, they leveraged. That's the difference. Let's take a step further into the generational aspect. This is where buy, borrow, die becomes almost magical. Families who master this strategy can maintain wealth for decades. They don't just get rich, they stay rich. Each generation inherits assets with a stepped-up basis, borrows against them, and repeats the cycle. The family grows richer, without ever selling the foundation that built their wealth in the first place. That's why some families have been rich for hundreds of years. You might be wondering, is this only possible in the stock market? No. Real estate, profitable businesses, even certain art or intellectual property can work, but it has to meet specific criteria. The asset must be valuable, stable, and predictable. Banks need to trust it as collateral. That's why cars, watches, or collectibles rarely qualify. They fluctuate too much and often lose value over time. Now, let's talk about taxes, because this is where most people get blindsided. Selling assets triggers taxes. Borrowing doesn't. That's a massive difference over decades. Imagine compounding your wealth while paying only small interest payments instead of losing a chunk of it every time. You need cash. The difference is astronomical. Over a lifetime, it could mean tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars more. Here's a mindset exercise. Imagine two people with identical assets. One sells to fund their lifestyle, paying all the taxes along the way. The other borrows strategically and keeps the assets working. Who ends up wealthier? Almost every time, it's the borrower. The magic isn't luck, it's using systems and rules that are already written to your advantage if you know them. And here's the part most people overlook. Inflation works for the wealthy in this system. If your assets are growing faster than inflation, the real cost of your loan decreases over time. What costs $100,000 in interest today could feel like $50,000 in 20 years, while your assets continue growing. That's another reason this strategy is so powerful. Now let's take a moment to compare this with the way most people manage money. Regular folks often work hard, save, and try to avoid debt entirely. They pay off their loans by depreciating goods and occasionally invest a little. The wealthy, on the other hand, focus on ownership, leverage, and compounding. The system is not broken, it's just designed differently for them. And understanding the difference is the first step to changing your financial mindset. Let's talk about mistakes. People often try to copy this strategy without the foundation. They borrow recklessly, use volatile assets, or overextend themselves. That's how you end up in financial trouble. The real takeaway isn't borrow a ton of money. It's use debt strategically, once you have assets that grow faster than the cost of borrowing. Finally, the psychological part. Living on debt requires a shift in thinking. You have to see loans as tools, not threats. Most people are conditioned to fear debt. The wealthy embrace it intelligently. It's not about being reckless. It's about being intentional. So what does this all mean for you? Even if you're not ready to implement, buy, borrow, diet, understanding it changes how you view money. You start to see the difference between income and wealth, between working for money and making money work for you. You understand why some people get rich and stay rich while most people struggle, despite working hard their entire lives. And here's something practical. If you're just starting out, focus on building assets. Stocks, real estate, businesses, anything that grows in value over time. Learn the principles of leverage. Understand taxes. And one day, when your assets are big enough, you'll be able to borrow like the wealthy. Do and keep your money compounding for generations. I also want to invite you to my free community, where I show exactly how to grow your YouTube channel, monetize it, and create income streams even if you're starting from zero. You'll learn strategies I've used to scale multiple channels and generate real income. There's a link below. Remember, this is education, not personal financial advice. Every step you take depends on your own decisions. But understanding these concepts now can completely change how you see money and wealth. The game isn't about working harder. It's about owning smarter, borrowing strategically, and letting your assets grow. So, take a moment. Think about your financial mindset and ask yourself, what would it take for you to start playing by the rules the wealthy already know? That shift alone is worth more than any paycheck. Let's dive deeper. Because understanding buy, borrow, die isn't just about money. It's about mindset, strategy, and playing a long game. The wealthy don't just rely on luck. Every move they make is intentional. They think decades ahead, not just months. That's what separates people who build generational wealth from those who work hard their entire lives. Without getting ahead, think about how most people spend money. Even if you save diligently, most of your wealth is tied up in things that don't produce more money. A house, a car, or a consumer gadget. These are assets that depreciate or stay stagnant. The wealthy focus on assets that grow while you sleep. They look for investments that generate cash flow, appreciate over time, and can be borrowed against when needed. Here's an everyday example. Imagine owning a business or a rental property that generates steady income every month. Most people would sell part of it when they need cash for personal expenses. But selling triggers taxes and reduces the future income potential of that asset. The wealthy, on the other hand, take a loan against it. The property or business keeps generating income while they use borrowed money to live, invest, or expand. That way, nothing stops working for them. Let's talk about leverage. For most people, borrowing is risky. And yes, borrowing recklessly is dangerous. But the wealthy borrow strategically, ensuring the cost of debt is smaller than the growth of their assets. That's the difference. Borrowing becomes a tool to accelerate wealth rather than a trap. Another point most people miss is patience. Wealthy individuals understand that building long-term growth beats short-term satisfaction. They don't sell assets for small gains. They let compounding work its magic, knowing that patience and discipline multiply wealth exponentially over decades. And this is where psychology comes in. Most people fear debt because they associate it with danger. The wealthy embrace it because they see debt as leverage. They have confidence in their assets, in their strategy, and in the rules of the system. It's not reckless, it's calculated. They know the cost of borrowing is tiny compared to what they would pay in taxes if they sold assets prematurely. Let's look at another scenario. What happens if the market dips? Most people panic, sell, and lock in losses. The wealthy maintain a conservative borrowing strategy. They never borrow the full value of their assets, leaving a safety buffer. If the market dips temporarily, they ride it out. That's why individual defaults on these types of loans are rare. The math is on their side, not just their luck. Now, let's expand on the generational aspect because this is where it gets almost magical. Families that master buy, borrow, die don't just build wealth, they preserve it. Each generation inherits assets with a stepped-up cost basis. That means they can borrow against those assets immediately without paying massive taxes. They can live off the loans, invest more, and pass wealth to the next generation with a fresh starting point. That's how some families have maintained wealth for centuries. And the beauty of this system is that it rewards ownership, not just income. Most people work hard for their paycheck, but the wealthy work to own assets. They use money as a tool to buy assets that generate more money. And then, they borrow against those assets to keep money flowing without reducing ownership. It's a completely different game. And understanding this game is the first step to financial freedom. Let's bring it back to real-life examples. You've probably heard about billionaires who borrow against shares or businesses instead of selling them. This allows them to fund projects, lifestyle expenses, or new investments while keeping the foundation of their wealth intact. The system isn't broken, it's just designed differently for people who already have substantial assets. Now, I want to talk about a practical mindset shift. Even if you don't have millions in assets yet, learning this strategy changes how you think about money. It helps you separate income from wealth, working from owning, and spending from investing. You start to see why some people get richer over time without increasing their salary. They own things that grow faster than their expenses, and they use debt to accelerate that growth. Here's something to consider. The wealthiest people also use time as an ally. They borrow against their assets instead of selling, because they understand that time compounds value. Selling prematurely means giving up potential growth, while borrowing allows assets to keep working. That patience and long-term thinking is what turns strategic debt into a powerful tool. And it's not just about money, it's about options. When you borrow instead of selling, you maintain flexibility. You can respond to opportunities, invest in new ventures, or weather economic changes without liquidating assets. Options are valuable, and the wealthy understand that flexibility often outweighs immediate gains. Now, let's talk about building a foundation for this strategy. You don't start by borrowing millions. You start by focusing on ownership. Acquire assets that appreciate over time. Stocks, real estate, profitable businesses, things that produce cash flow and grow in value. Learn how to leverage taxes legally. Understand debt as a tool, and build patience and discipline. That foundation is essential. Once you have assets that meet those criteria, borrowing becomes a tool too. Multiply growth. You don't touch the principal. You pay interest that is far smaller than what taxes would cost if you sold. Over time, your assets keep compounding. Your lifestyle remains funded, and you continue building wealth efficiently. Finally, let's return to the big picture. Buy, borrow, die isn't a loophole, it's a system. It's designed for people who understand how to manage assets, leverage debt, and think long-term. It's a blueprint for building and preserving wealth. And it works because it aligns with the rules of money, taxes, and human psychology. Even if you're starting from nothing, learning these principles changes how you view money, work, and wealth. It shifts your focus from just earning to owning, from immediate spending to strategic investing, from fear of debt to intelligent leverage. That shift alone is worth more than any paycheck you'll ever earn. And remember, if you want to learn more practical ways to apply financial strategies, build assets, and create income streams, even from scratch, you can join my free community. I walk people step by step through starting YouTube channels, monetizing content, and building long-term income streams in today's economy. Understanding these ideas now doesn't mean you're doing the strategy tomorrow, but it sets your mind on a completely different path. It's about seeing the system, understanding the rules, and preparing to use them when the time is right. The wealthy don't just work, they own, leverage, and plan for generations. Let's take a step back and really think about what most people consider wealth. For most, it's the size of your paycheck, the house you own, or the car you drive. But the ultra-wealthy think differently. Wealth isn't about how much you earn, it's about how much you own, how well it grows, and how efficiently you use it. Here's a scenario to illustrate. Imagine two people with the same net worth. One spends most of their life working for money, saving slowly, and paying taxes along the way. The other owns businesses, rental properties, or stocks. They borrow against their assets when needed, pay only small interest amounts, and let the assets keep growing. Over decades, the second person's wealth multiplies while the first person stagnates. Now let's talk about strategy over panic. Market downturns happen. Most people sell when things drop, fearing losses. The wealthy see downturns as temporary. They maintain conservative borrowing, only taking a fraction of their assets as loans. If a dip occurs, their assets still cover the loan. They ride it out, knowing growth will continue. That patience separates wealth accumulation from simple income. Another key element is the psychological approach. Debt scares most people. Even a small credit card balance triggers stress. But for the wealthy, debt is a tool, not a burden. They embrace loans intelligently. They understand interest is a cost, but far smaller than the taxes they would pay if they sold assets. They also understand timing. Borrow when it makes sense, repay or refinance strategically, and always leave room for growth. Let's explore a real-life example without naming numbers. Imagine an entrepreneur who owns a profitable business. They want to expand operations, hire staff, or buy new equipment. Selling part of their company would reduce future profits and trigger taxes. Instead, they take a loan secured by the business. They fund growth while keeping ownership intact. The loan costs far less than the profits they expect to make from expansion. That's leverage in action. Now, think generationally. This is where buy, borrow, die really shines. Families who understand this system can maintain wealth across decades. Each generation inherits assets with a fresh cost basis. They can borrow immediately, fund their lifestyle or investments, and continue the cycle. Assets compound, interest is manageable, and taxes are minimized. Wealth doesn't just accumulate, it multiplies across generations. Let's also touch on lifestyle. Living on borrowed money doesn't mean reckless spending. The wealthy use debt to fund opportunities and maintain flexibility. They might fund a new project, invest in a new property, or fund a strategic move without selling their core assets. Loans give them freedom. They can act quickly, while keeping their foundation intact. It's worth emphasizing that this strategy is not a short-term plan. The wealthy play the long game. They borrow, invest, refinance, and repeat. They understand that compounding works best over decades. They aren't chasing immediate gratification. They're building lasting wealth that continues to grow even if they never increase their income. Now let's return to the mindset shift. Understanding debt as a tool changes everything. Most people see loans as a trap. The wealthy see them as an accelerator. They borrow to invest, borrow to maintain lifestyle without selling, and borrow to grow assets for the next generation. That's a profound difference. Another overlooked factor is inflation. Inflation can actually work in favor of borrowers. If your assets grow faster than inflation, the real cost of debt decreases over time. What seems like a large interest payment today may be a fraction of its real value in the future, while your assets continue appreciating. This is another way borrowing strategically accelerates wealth. Now let's expand on risk management. Borrowing is safe for the wealthy because they use disciplined strategies. They borrow conservatively, never touching their full asset value. They diversify assets so that a dip in one area doesn't endanger the entire portfolio. And they only borrow against stable, predictable assets like stocks, real estate, or businesses. Volatile investments rarely serve as collateral because banks need measurable security. Let's also consider taxes again. This is where most people are blindsided. Selling assets triggers taxes, often a huge chunk of the money you've built. Borrowing does not. That difference over time can be enormous. Using loans instead of selling allows wealth to compound without the constant drain of taxes. Over decades, this could translate to a difference of millions or even tens of millions of dollars in wealth. And here's a thought experiment. Imagine two people with identical portfolios. One sells a portion each year to fund their lifestyle. The other borrows against the portfolio instead. Who ends up wealthier in the long run? Every time, it's the one who borrows. The system is designed to reward ownership and leverage, not just income or short-term cash flow. Let's also discuss opportunity. Borrowing strategically allows the wealthy to act fast when opportunities arise. Whether it's acquiring a property, funding a startup, or investing in a rare opportunity, having liquidity through loans provides flexibility. If they sold assets instead, it would take time, trigger taxes, and possibly miss the opportunity. Loans allow action without sacrificing growth. Finally, even if you don't have millions in assets today, understanding these principles is powerful. It shifts your perspective on income versus wealth, spending versus investing, and risk versus opportunity. It teaches you that financial freedom isn't about working harder. It's about owning smarter, leveraging wisely, and thinking long-term. And remember, if you want to apply practical strategies like these, You can join my free community where I show how to grow a YouTube channel, monetize content, and create income streams, even starting from scratch. You'll see step by step how to build financial freedom in the modern economy. Understanding buy, borrow, die now won't make you rich overnight, but it changes how you see money, wealth, and opportunity. It shifts your mindset from short-term thinking to long-term strategy. And that alone is worth far more than any paycheck.